There was once a race of beings who could live by turning most of their attention inward or outward, or both. Except that no one was permitted to do both at the same time. Well, at least no one ever did, whether it was permissible or not. You know. One man one day wondered, how can you tell if people are working or not? Then answered his own question, by the fact that they work. If you take life to be as it seems to be, then you can either laugh at life or criticize life. But once you know the truth about life, then the way everyone else takes it is somewhere just this side of painfully ridiculous. The mind, metaphorically speaking, is like seeing with two eyes, while consciousness is like seeing with either, choose one of the following, one eye, three eyes, no eyes. One man's mind said to him, I sure am glad you only speak of me metaphorically. Later the man began to wonder if that was a mere statement of fact or a threat. If you don't want anything out of life, it's hard to get excited about life. And in the transcendental sense, if you don't get excited about life and about your being on the trail of discovering the truth about it, it won't give up much. One man so reflected, 'tis hard being alive amongst the dead, likewise being dead amidst those imaginarily alive. Local conditions said to one man, look, if you're so sick of life and want nothing more from it, why don't you just get out? And the man replied, that's easy, too easy for you to say, seeing as how you're just a front man for life anyway. And, I don't know whether you saw it or not, but the man was that close to realizing something extraordinary. Something quite mundane and plain, always in front of him, but extraordinary all the same, once you actually see it. A song, first verse. Minds are always in conflict, consciousness never. Same as sounds clash and collide as they compete for attention, while silence is in permanent agreement. Second verse, Denergo. Opposing ideas are always of equal validity and significance. How the choice of vocations work themselves out in the ordinary world. Men become prison guards who are afraid they'll eventually commit a crime and just want to save some time. Note, any attempt to expand the scope of this metaphor and in so doing expose oneself to the inherent dangers thereof will, by such an act, place the legal assumption of risk squarely on the shoulders of the expander. If you'd like for me to reread that, later. Tonight's myth on the rat of life was originally a flea, which, when seen, explained much about the nature of life's life. But soon after it was first seen, it proved too disturbing to most, and a new, more complicated name for it was found. Tonight's more offensive myth. Seekers of the mystery go off looking for it, while those who've discovered it would just like to forget it. Hey, come on, it was just a joke. A harmless, little offensive joke, for Christ's sake. On one world were many illnesses that could only be kept alive by paying attention to them. And a boy asked his dad, and the old man replied, yes, son, I'm working on it. Men invented NASA after medicine became too frightening. Too frighteningly close, that is. Knock, knock. How can you spot a planet on which everyone wants to be well? Knock, knock. It's deserted. Men invented the quest for the truth after the truth proved too disturbing. And a boy asked his dad, is it about ready? Being overcome by the problems of the world helps keep one from being overcome by one's own. Okay, the true version. All right. Being overcome by the problems of the world helps keep one from ever realizing that one's own are illusionary. Also, one day a man thought, it's amazing, I can make up things about life as fast as I can think. And one day life thought, it's amazing, as fast as I can make up things, men will think about them. Another song, first verse. Believing that something specific in man's behavior is the problem continues to be simple minds' explanations cum exoneration. Played backwards. As long as dragonflies can blame the conditions of the pond, blame the conditions on the pond, they can bear being dragonflies. Listeners note, to conscious ears, the sequence of the music played is irrelevant. Tonight's travel tale. There was once a man who had seen Istanbul and later determined that if he'd keep writing and talking about it, that he'd never go there again. By the way, there are 3 versions to this story. Next one. There was once a man who had seen Istanbul and later determined that if he'd keep writing and talking about it, that he'd never be able to go there again. 3rd version. There was once a man who had seen Istanbul and later determined that if he'd keep writing and talking about it, that he'd never have to go there again. There actually is a 4th version that says the first 3 make no sense and are totally unreliable, unless one of them seems to apply to you, in which case you're directed to go on to the 5th version. More regarding the alternatives available in routine life. The reason that man has both religion and mental illness is so that if you cannot afford one, you can the other. I don't know how often I'm going to have to warn you about taking these straightforward, literal bits of info and trying to extend them into non-material internal areas where they most definitely do not belong. One little lad used to kick at the foundations of every public institution he passed. He did so with such vigor and consistency that amongst the town folks he became known as he who limps. No one who has not done a type of specific work on themselves can claim to have anything resembling their own individual mind. A song with several verses. In a certain land, whenever one man would develop a new idea to live by, no matter how great it was, if he told somebody else about it, it'd fall apart on him. Glad you don't live there. What? Everything else going on notwithstanding, there is one thing for certain to be said in favor of silence, although the ordinary have no idea what it is. In a certain city, whenever this one kid would start to drift off to sleep, his father would slap him and shout, "Snap out of it, damn it! Do you want to live here forever?" Any normal cow will end up sounding like every other cow. What's so strange about that? The simple believe that behavior will get them into heaven, while simultaneously conjuring up the idea of faith to cover up the fact that they cannot effectuate the needed behavior. Every morning, one man couldn't get his car started and would apologize to his neighbor, who didn't know why, since it wasn't his car. On one world, the words neighbor and car got somehow allegorically entangled with such unrelated ones as life and consciousness. The simple always fault the exterior of the building for any internal flaws. When one man heard of a song entitled, "Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better," he thought, how nice for someone to write a tune to their mind. More travel news from the land of the mind. Words are like the cars that make up a train that's going nowhere. After years of feeling otherwise, one man was finally struck If the mind is as powerful and important as generally thought, then how come it allows itself to be so freely spoken of in derisive, dismissive fashion? There are two attacks from which elephants do not defend themselves: assaults by fleas and by imaginary larger creatures. Only life will kick a man when he's down and out, and only then if he takes life seriously. One man says that sitting at home alone, he can get pretty close to being awake. But when he goes outside around other people, well, it's all over. How to tell that you're modern and up to date? You want to be interviewed. This is also how you can tell that you're ordinary and know nothing. Unless you think you want to be questioned. There was once a buzzard that couldn't fly and couldn't understand why no one wanted to hear about it. There is a reason that communication between the mind and consciousness is so negligible, though those of the mind never know why. Footnote: those to the mind born who stay there, no matter where, no matter when, are always in fashion, modern, and up to date. There was once a planet of two-eyed creatures, and half of them saw everything weighted in favor of their left eye, and the other half saw everything as favored by the right, which kept everything in balance. There was once a planet of two-eyed creatures, some of whom wouldn't put up with the arrangement. One man kept hoping upon hope that life would finally announce, get with the program or get out of town. If you can say or think, no comment, you still have a comment. For the knight who's been to the holy city, death is no longer his problem. Being repeatedly so is. More of how things are. To help explain the moon, the mind will throw rocks at it. As regards knowing the truth about life, in case you haven't yet caught on, as regards knowing the truth about life, you can't figure it out. Personal problems mean nothing to a man who has shed the illusion of having a personal and developed a real one. Those struggling for individual consciousness are continual victims of a holdup at their own hands. What is enlightenment? Well, one guy describes it as seeing life not through comment. There was once a carnival in which the fun house broke down. But they'd let people walk through anyway after they passed under a sign that said, a serious customer is a ridiculous customer. And no, there are no refunds. There was once a man who suspected that everyone secretly worked for life. And one day, one man was so struck, if secrets are as big a deal as men think, then how come they're laying around everywhere, right out in the open? Life the ventriloquist one day mused, if I had one more hand, I could even make a three-eyed lookout dizzy. Look out, shouted local conditions, the big guy's at it again. And life thought, can't anyone take a joke anymore? From a more conscious view, arguing is the same as agreeing in that both are cases of drowning in the same pool. If we lived in a better world. It's just the title of the, just the headline of the. Oh, I get it. It was the mock sincerity. If we lived in a better world. Anything obvious to ordinary minds, the ordinary would see, is obviously incomplete. Question: how can you spot a real mystical monastery? Answer: it's silent and unseen and inside someone's head. Pigs only want to improve themselves after it's pointed out what swine they are, which, like everything else close to the truth about life, only makes sense if you don't think about it in the normal way. One man developed the motto, no talk, no guilt. He's now working to expand it to no thought, no guilt. One man decided that God wants everybody's ideas to run together, which is why paper comes in reams and not single sheets. All the creatures on one world are born in a pair of shoes and told to never polish them. One man had this question: if you know the truth about life, does that mean that life can't push you around anymore after that? And he named this question, "Dream on, you silly twit, you." A song of many verses. One father offered his son the following advice on how to handle the problem of illness and the mind. Said he, "Only think about illness when you're actually ill, and then not much. Creatures accustomed to standing on 2 feet find it difficult not to favor one when the other is sore. There was once a world of 2-legged beings who never realized that both limbs grew from the same trunk. If you only stand where you're planted, your knowledge of soil is quite limited, particularly regarding that under your feet." Legend says that when Brer Rabbit confronted his fate at the hands of the fox, and Adam faced his expulsion from the garden, they both exclaimed to their tormentors, "No, please, anything but don't throw me on that merry-go-round." One father noted to his son, "As long as you think about the carousel, you ride the son of a bitch." And in case you didn't get it the first time around, from the neck up, the conscious have almost nothing in common with everyone else. Almost, almost, almost. When you're charitable enough to send a weasel a get weaseled card, knock, knock, how can you tell that a real mystical warrior is inside a particular suit of armor? Because he's no longer in there. There's another legend that's very little known. I've never taken the occasion to write down, but perhaps some of you will enjoy it before we start. It is said that Zoroaster, considered to be the father of this planet's religion, on his obvious deathbed, had been mute, motionless for a considerable length of time, and some of his friends and followers, already taking him for having departed this vale of Mideastern turmoil, began to already discuss what religion, how they would start a religion now, and particularly they got tied up on what to call it. And after a few hours of them going through it, Zoroaster suddenly opened an eye, turned his head a little bit, and he says, "Why don't you just call it imaginary geese farts in the wind?" And they asked, "Why in the world do we want to do that?" And he said, "Well, that's what the enlightened are going to eventually call it." Not speaking on my own behalf, but perhaps there is a reason that some legends are lesser known than others. Considering again what we were talking about, that as charitable as I was to any uncomfortable weasel by reminding you in that last news item that there is almost nothing that the conscious and the ordinary hold above the neck, at least in common. And do keep in mind that we're not speaking physically, and it's not based upon any standard of how a person should be, but since if you were conscious in a non-ordinary sense, no one who knows anything would predict how you will act, what you will think about. They give no prognostication about it, or else they don't understand what it is. But in spite of that, it is not disingenuous to speak in general, not about people, but about consciousness itself. Individualized consciousness, not tied to the total web, the network of all ordinary consciousness, normally referred to, in my case, as the mind. That it is not untoward to just talk about the difference between a non-mentally based view, read consciousness, and an ordinary one. And being charitable makes it sound better when I say that the consciousness and the mind have almost nothing in common. Better said, in truth is, they have nothing in common. And you would think that the first version would have been the more apt, because surely they have something in common. Words, symbols. If they do, if consciousness still has any comment, which is almost a certainty that it will periodically have a comment, or those of you keeping close notes, consciousness will lapse, will fall into a stupor, into a disreputable state known as the mind, and in such cases it must have a comment. It will deal in words and symbols. But in spite of that, the point being, tonight I want you to consider to say that consciousness and the mind has almost, or nothing, according to how strong your perception is, in common, is also this fact. Consciousness, when I say it has nothing in common with the mind, what people ordinarily think about, including the mind of the person who is now conscious. But to say that they have nothing in common is not to say that the view, the understanding of consciousness is in any way opposed to the mind, which is where all philosophy, all attempts at some sort of theological speculation, all sorts, in fact, psychology itself pushed to the limits, standard psychology, and all sense of social order, all sense of social criticism by anyone. That is where it breaks down, because the mind is based upon the fact, operates on the basis that anything it sees is in some way either a correction or a criticism of something someone else has already seen or said. Thus, if you talk about, right quick, if it helps the point be made, to take the most widely recognized form of attempted social criticism and reform, generally thought of as religion, continually acting as a professional hector toward man, a continual source of reproachment of how he should be. It is on the basis that there is some way that he behaves now that is unacceptable, not to his advantage, and then describes, which shouldn't take much once you describe what should not be going on. You have got to have a very limited walking around intelligence not to be able to figure out for yourself, not to get the punchline. If somebody preaches 4 hours about the evils of alcohol and then says that they have the solution, I mean, I'll assume that even most people would guess what the punchline is going to be. But at times it appears to be much more subtle than that, much more convoluted and complex. But still it is the mind, when it is operating in the mode that apparently is from a superior view, whether it be based on education, revelation, a man's own indigenous intelligence, that he looks upon life, some aspect of it, and he begins to preach about it, begins to condemn ways in which men are behaving in some specific area. But it's always on the basis that what he is attempting to offer, which is still coming from the mind, is simply a correction. It is an opposing idea. It is never seen as mere opposition, and it's certainly never seen by the mind, since it's the part of the basis of its own foundation and operation. It is never seen as an absolute necessity. There is no such thing as an idea to the mind with no opposition. That would, in fact, meet Zoroaster's definition in a non-clerical manner of imaginary geese farts in the wind. Because if you had an idea for which there is no opposition, and you can come up with it, I could stand here and make up one, but it would sound like gibberish. It would sound like a non sequitur, because you would have to come up with an idea, a sentence, to which the mind had not already had established in it, the collective minds of whoever I was talking to. In right time and place, it would have to be a sentence that rhetorically made no sense. Even if I used ordinary words, but still the sentence. It might sound like it was about to make sense, but I get through and I look like, well, that was it. And you think, well, damn, that was just a verbal non sequitur. That would be the closest that the mind, that close example I can make of an idea that would have no opposition. Thus it be also, if anyone cares to notice, why there is no such thing at the ordinary level as originality. Certainly no such thing as originality of thought, which is why cliches and thinking in cliches passes for originality of thought. Because since there is not originality of thought, all a man can be, an ordinary man can be, is in fashion. And never noticing the fact that the proof that you're in fashion and mentally with it is by the fact that you know the latest cliches, catchphrases, buzzwords. That's how you show your intelligence. Which, in case you think that people are about to snap out of it, no one ever notices this. I mean, it's there and I can point it out. It's not like that it took some kind of great surreptitious spying and digging on my part. It's going on constantly. That those considered to be the intellectual bellwethers, the insightful gurus of our day and time, no matter when it is, they continually will speak in up-to-date jargon, in cliches. They can't go 2 or 3 sentences without using some, and I'm using cliche in the widest possible sense, that you can, if you have walking around intelligence, you can, with any social expert, psychologist, theologian, political commentator, anything that has to do with non-specific technical areas, when they start making a survey from their magnanimous, from their high view, something to do with the nature of man, you can finish any sentence they're going to repeat and that they're about to say. You can go and pay money or go to some effort to hear them speak, and you can sit there if you have any intelligence and finish every sentence they're going to finish. Withal, if they get up there and you can't do it, the man is not an expert. The man is probably, the strain of his work is beginning to tell on him. Or it's years of drinking. The point is, the man is falling apart. He can be a Nobel Prize winner in psychology or whatever field. And if he starts speaking and you cannot, if you're just an ordinary intelligent person, sit there and actually finish off every sentence he's going to say, then you should be concerned about the man if you have concern for your fellow man, because he is coming apart even as he stands there. He is going to pieces. And yet, just to show you how life's arranged, no one ever notices that, and it's not like I'm the greatest genius. That's child's play. But just notice that it never arises. No one ever turns, no 2 experts or on a panel somewhere, and one say, by the way, not just you, but he suddenly takes a sense the guy just did about, well, the only thing we can ask for, since we're going to have to bite the bullet and make those kind of hard decisions either at a national level or a local level, if the playing field does not get equal for everyone, there's no doubt. I'm not sure that our society, as we know it now, will survive. And everybody goes, well, by God. And so the guy next to him, an equal expert, notice it never happens. The guy turns to him, maybe he's a colleague, a friend of his. And he goes, by the way, Dr. So-and-so, Not just you, because I just got through doing the same thing, but it just suddenly struck me after all these years. Do you realize that for the last 2 minutes, I was trying to keep count, and at least 60% of what you said was couched in the form of a catchphrase, buzzwords, or a common cliche that I could finish. I didn't see your script. I didn't know what you were going to say tonight. I could sit here and finish it. Now I'm looking at the audience. I bet they could. And suddenly, he could see it if it was presented the right way, objectively. Many people in the audience would go, well, that's true. Then, if some nut like a Zoroaster's ghost showed up on this planet and jumped out and hollered, now we're getting somewhere. You people just admitted what he said. And they went, yeah? They go, well? And the ordinary mind goes, well? So that's the problem. To the mind, there is no point to this, which is why it's always so popular. People can listen to it and they go, well, what's the point? And if you insinuate, well, maybe there's not a point and maybe that's it. They go, well, you're just being cute. God, that I could be. Well, but we're not talking about physical matters, friends and neighbors, or else we're all in trouble. Well, many of us are. But thank God, if it makes you feel any better, I have happened to have seen the only surviving photo of Zoroaster. And I'm going to tell you what, he wasn't all that much. If it gives any of you people any hope. To say that consciousness, remember we're not talking about people, it has nothing to do with individual people, but to say that consciousness, a man's, through a certain kind of effort, that he has developed his own separate, as much as possible, individual consciousness as opposed to a man's, to the mind born. To say that they have nothing in common to an ordinary mind, a normal, educated, sophisticated, average person, if you present that to the mind, what can the mind make of that? Only one thing, if it takes it as having some serious intent. The only thing it can make of it is that I would be insinuating that what people normally think is incorrect, and in some way I'm insinuating that you can be in some other state of consciousness or you can see things differently to where you understand the incorrectness of what people think. That's the best you can do with it. And to say that's not even close is not even close. Being the so-called enlightenment, liberation of the mind, the awakening of consciousness, all of that, it does not correct the errors of the mind. It does not present opposing, conflicting ideas, which if you point that out to the mind, it can go nowhere with it. If it attempted to give you its best, sincere attention, there's nowhere you can go with it. If for nothing else, I could point out that every example it knows, all the way from public religion to all records, all known records of so-called and assumed metaphysical systems of Zen, Sufism, Christian and Judaic mystical groups and operations. We'll just take religion, the public form of mysticism. What does it present? If nothing else, if you describe it as nothing else, what it presents are views that conflict with the day and time. If they don't, they get absorbed and the crown, Caesar and God become one. And it becomes a theocracy. A religion, if it is not in conflict with Caesar, if the views it's presenting are not in conflict, it's a doomed religion, or it's become political, and vice versa. So the point is, religion and all mystical ideas, and not just public religion. If you start digging out, if you start reading the records of the Zen activity or Sufism, anything that you want to pick out, the Tibetan liberation attempts at the liberation of the mind. If you read any of these, without any doubt, the mind reads it as being that it's offering, and you can pick your own word because I'm not using it in a particular offensive manner, but they are offering conflicting views. They're offering views that oppose the normal views. They're offering ideas that to some degree oppose the standard ideas of some time and place. If they did not, they would not even be identified by disinterested parties as mysticism. or his religion. If it was conventional wisdom, if they were taking, it doesn't have to be any of the examples you know that I use. There could be some transcendental activity going on somewhere of whose name you'd never heard. And in that one little locale, it could be just one village, one area of one little mountain range, it will not even be identified. No one will be attracted to it. It will have no life. It will have no breath unless it is offering ideas that are in conflict with the prevailing local ideas. Not right or wrong, but their ideas in some way must be in conflict with the prevailing paradigm of reality and what reality is and what it should be. Okay. That's the best you can make of it. And in fact, I can go on from there, and people long before me, but I could take the view, but you can do it for yourself. It's easy enough. Of that being its claim to fame, of that being its power of any mystical system or any religion. That its power is in the fact that it is offering a competing view. And of course, it's normally considered, proclaimed by its adherents as being the correcting view. In other words, Christianity does not just correct the life of heathens. It doesn't just correct some of the mistakes, it's supposed to replace it. It is the answer. But the point is, it doesn't consider itself in competition, other than the philosophical idea of some struggle between good and evil. Any system that has any wide appeal in any area, the ideas, its model of reality, its ideas of how people should live, how they should behave, will to some degree, some discernible degree, be in competition, be opposed to whatever the prevailing views are, the prevailing sense of reality, of propriety. It's simply not true at a more conscious level. Which, if I was going to present that as being the opening volley or the heart of mysticism, that would also be the opening, the heart of, and the end of. Because after that, your mind goes, well, It'd be like, Buddha showed up and he picked up a clay pigeon and he said, here's enlightenment, and he threw it up and he shot it. And then said, well, I got to go, and left. And you thought, well, what did I just say? Jesus says, here is the kingdom of God, and he throws it up, shoots it right out of the air. And he goes, are there any questions? And there are no questions after that. The mind goes, what the hell? What happened? What is it? Consciousness has nothing in common with the mind because it is not in competition with the mind. It does not correct the mind. The ideas of the mind are not incorrect. Any idea that anybody has, no matter how weird, no matter how insane it appears to be, is at least 1/6 billionth sane. Or for those of you that like it stronger, no matter how wild it is, and by that it's not my definition, how extreme it seems to be compared to the local environment. No matter how extreme and wild and crazy the view seems to be, it is at least 1/6 billionth of reality, of the truth about life. And again, my sort of rhetorical question is, if that makes you feel better. Are you prepared? Which is you are, no one has any complaint, but if you are satisfied to go through life knowing, because I give you my solemn word, everything that you know, just naturally, however you got here, where you are in life, everything you know, no matter how it may be scorned, how much of it may be out of the mainstream, no matter how stupid you may think you are, I can guarantee you this, everything you know taken in toto, the operations of your mind is at least 1/6 billionth of the truth about life. Now, if you can carry on in your life and be satisfied with that, in fact, you could even be encouraged and say, well, I've got 1/6 billionth of it down, by God, onward and upward. It only took me 20 years, 30 years to get down 1/6 billionth, which it didn't take you that long, you were born with it, but that's too much to put on somebody. And you can say, well, by God, another 20 years and I could have 2/6 billionths of it. Which is the old idea that people always, any kind of true activity such as this, well, there's stories in all religions. Somebody going to Moses or Abraham or Muhammad and saying, should everyone be a Muslim? Should everyone follow the secret work? Should everybody be on this quest? And the answer is no. After these guys die, You can't make a religion. The followers and his family can't make a living out of it if you say no. If you say, you know, should I be living such and such way? And his family can't say, well, hey, Muhammad's dead. The game's over anyway. Forget it. But we started a religion if you want to join up. And everybody goes, yeah, we'll be right back. There has to be, apparently, some direction about how a man should live. But there are none. But notice all religions, and it's assumed, it's written into, even those activities that apparently are of a metaphysical nature, not just religion, that they all seem to have some structure to them. They seem to have, or not seem, when I say seem, I'm, you know, sort of talking between us. They literally do, but it still seems that way. That they have a specific purpose. And they say, here is a statement of how reality is. There is no such statement. And the idea of awakening or enlightenment, it does not correct the flaws. It does not bring up a corrected view of your old view of life. That is why there's nothing in common. Because if you're correcting someone else's views, if your ideas in life, if your sense of what reality is still in opposition to someone else's, anybody else's, no matter how weird, no matter how moderate. And of course, I'm saying this rhetorically because everyone's mind is based upon ideas that are in opposition. The half of everything you think is opposed by half the other people in the world. If it wasn't, this would be a barren desert. This would be the east side of the Garden of Eden, according to one of my recent myths I told you, was a barren plain, but upon which has been built by man a magnificent illusionary city. But it would not have been so if everybody had one idea. For those of you that like a new interpretation of the Tower of Babel, forget language, you had to have opposing ideas. You'd never get the first brick laid, the first pile driven, the first shovel of dirt shoveled. There's got to be opposing ideas. Even if you had Adam staying around with, his brother-in-law, and they thought, well, why don't we build civilization? Why don't we get the mind going? You got a shovel, why don't you start digging a trench? If that was the end of the story, we wouldn't be here. Here's what had to happen. Adam's brother-in-law turned around and said, well, hey, why don't we go ahead and start building up things, and let's get to work and do something worthwhile, worthy of man. Why don't we build a city here? In fact, we need some footings. You got the shovel. Why don't you dig one? And Adam said, why don't you dig it? Then now we're getting somewhere. It didn't have to be literally that. It's either that or Adam said, hey, you got to keep your ideas to yourself. Who's talking? There had to be that. It couldn't be the one thing. Which we're going to back up the Genesis story a little bit, is the same thing as, God, creation. The silent garden had to speak to man to get it going. But man had to reply. To take the idea, is it put literally in the Old Testament, if God said, what the hell are you up to? Did you eat that? Did you do what? If Adam had kept his mouth shut, now some of you might immediately think, oh, you're going to say they'd never thrown him out of the garden. Right. Well, we wouldn't be here. The only way he could have got thrown out was he had to say something. It doesn't matter what. But the ordinary minds, it always thinks the content is important. That it makes a difference. God says, did you eat off that tree? Now see, ordinary minds will say, well, now this is going to be important. Is he going to tell the truth? Is he going to lie? It doesn't matter. All that was necessary was that the son of a gun answer. He would have been safe, if you consider safe, for everybody that still dreams the same thing, that dreams of paradise lost, and then hope it'll be paradise coming up after I die. No refunds, though. Remember that house of mirrors that broke down, that fun house? No refunds. But anyway, for people that think it's paradise lost, and if that's what everything is about, if it makes you happy, then I can give you my assurance that we would not be in the pickle of a mess. In the sorry state we're in today, according to everyone that has any intelligence and good suits and haircuts, we would not be, by God, going down the tubes There's one. Think I can't use them. I know them. Going to hell in a handbasket. Don't get me started. I'll have to put on a suit and get a diploma somewhere and be an expert. At any rate, if it makes you feel good, don't worry about us being thrown or lost completely forever and struck out, cut off from the center of creation, from God himself, the creative force, thrown from the garden. If it makes you feel better, let me tell you this. It did not have to be. And if Adam had not answered, we'd still be there. If that makes you happy. You wouldn't know where you were. You wouldn't be anybody individual. And about the most intelligent conversation in which we'd be engaged would be things like moo, blah, maybe here and there, and arf, arf. But that would have been it. Back to there was a point to this, not a correcting of the Old Testament. But does anybody here? It was a story I was getting about Adam and his illusionary brother-in-law standing there leaning on a shovel. It's when God said, and it didn't matter what, this tree of knowledge and all that, that's you can plug in different metaphors and intents. But all that mattered, God could have said anything. They hollered, hey you, can you hear me? I mean, that's about as innocuous. And if Adam had never responded, if he just kept standing there, and God said, hey, I'm talking to you. And he knew it was him because he's the only guy there on the whole planet. Anyway, I'm talking to you. Which for those of you getting good, you could look at as being where the cutoff line started between being unidirectionally conscious and staring is how the mind started. Because as long as Adam would have kept going, God could have tried it louder and louder. Hey, I know you can hear me. Hey, answer. Then he gets started, talking about his mama, trying to insult him. If Adam, if you want to look at it this way, if he had had his wits, if he had had me there to advise him, if he had never responded, he wouldn't have been thrown out. That's why he got thrown out, which all it represents is he got thrown out because then the mind turned into consciousness. Then it began to see life through comment, which I gave you one guy's definition tonight, or his description of enlightenment. It's seeing life not through comment. But as soon as Adam, what that represents, as soon as Adam responded, one statement's all right. One idea is all right. And I'm saying all right, just in a figure of speech, is inconclusive, non-injurious, non-directional, non-operative. There has to be a response to it. Again, for those of you who can see it, is if you need like another description, is why ordinary minds, why people cannot, as they call it, find the truth. Why men cannot arrive at some common agreement to the truth. Why Jews and Muslims and Italians and Greeks and Turks cannot sit down by God and come to some agreement as brothers. Get rid of these petty differences and just see the truth as it is. Oh. It cannot be done. I mean, it's not that people are stupid. It's not that people have been cursed. It's not that the gods have got it in for man. They're dealing on the basis of the mind, and the mind cannot operate on a single idea. Put it to you another way. If everybody on this planet could sit down and suddenly come, in the fullest sense of the word, to complete agreement that all conflict was gone, unless we get physical conflict, because you've always got that, as long as you're healthily wired up as a survival physical being. But forgetting all that we're talking about man in the singular sense of him having a functioning intellect. If we could take all of humanity and actually sit them down and work some magic, and they did come to one mind, as it's called, that all non-survival, non-physical, non-biological conflicts notwithstanding, that everything else from the neck up, all of his so-imagined religious, cultural, political, economic, social, whatever, all of the conflicts that they could, through some way, finally come. We got all 6 billion, the day came, got closer and closer, and finally it happened. We all came to one mind. Don't worry about heaven. Don't worry about paradise after that, because you're back in the garden. If suddenly they took a vote, that suddenly humanity felt we're close, and it takes not a majority vote, it takes a unanimous vote. And they holler, all right, here's what we decided. And whatever it was, we've all decided that we'll become Norwegian Lithuanians, and we'll all be half man and half woman, and we'll be freeloaders and free marketers. Anyway, they come up with this whole list. Here's what we agreed on. What do you say? They ask, all in favor, and 6 billion hands go up. Or not hands, do it the real way. A voice vote. How many on this planet's in favor? And 6 billion voices go, aye. That would be the last word ever heard on this planet. Because if that happened, there would never be anything else said, there would never be anything else thought. That would be the end of the human mind as it is now. Back to the main track. At any rate, that is, for no other reason, it is a mathematical fact. It is based upon physics, albeit a peculiar form. Well, a form not taught in educational circles. That is why man will never come to agreement, speaking from the neck up. It cannot. The mind cannot come to agreement. The mind is based upon opposing ideas. It is based upon conflict the same way as survival at the physical level, at the physical food chain. The mind operates in the same way as competing ideas, opposing ideas. And the ordinary mind still, no matter how educated it becomes, no matter how sophisticated, the mind becomes, is always on the basis that what I think, notwithstanding, I'm not saying that some other people, some conflicting ideas, some groups of people with other political or whatever ideas, I'm not saying that they're totally without merit. But if they in some way could see the greater validity of my views, and it's ellipsis time, there's no such thing as coming to common agreement from the neck up in the mind. Minds are always in conflict. Consciousness, never. In the same way that sounds are always clashing as they compete for attention, whereas silence is permanently in agreement. Didn't go any better this time, did it? Yeah. There is never any conflict in silence. But as long as you have sound, which is a physical operation of the mind, as long as you have sound, there's going to be opposition. In fact, there cannot be sound without the opposing eardrum to pick it up. Could it be any more difficult, read impossible, but any more difficult to try and picture, talk about, explain what would be to see life not through comment? That is, to try and describe whatever it is I mean by consciousness as opposed to the mind, whereas compared to the mind, the operational definition of silence in one comparable manner would be silence. Which is, again, I assume everyone finally got the point. I was trying to, again, draw a metaphor. The allegory of a figure like a Jesus and other religious figures, but of a Jesus there and dying after becoming conscious, assuming that what it represents was a quite conscious man at the time and at the place, and then there as he dies, after being cut, spit upon, ridiculed, and laughed at, that there in his final moments, that it is not totally beyond the imagination that he could have found some complaint with the conditions of things. You know, like, couldn't they have used smaller nails, or, you know, couldn't they have done it in better weather? You know, couldn't they get the flies off of them? You know? I mean, it's not. But then he realized this whole thing about why is that die forsaken me? What he meant, you know, why is my consciousness? I mean, just because I'm dying, and then, you know, hung up by rusty nails, which he'd already done it to himself before this. Why am I now suddenly? Shame on me. That is the same that I was trying to get you to consider, that consciousness does not look upon the mind as an error. It looks upon the consciousness looked upon it being back to the level of the mind of it being an error. The ideas that the mind has about life are not erroneous. They're all, figuratively speaking, half right. Literally speaking, they're all 1/6 billionth right. But consciousness has no comment on it. And that's one of the things that you can also see reflected in those kind of metaphors of someone being crucified or put to death. By the way, Socrates offers another situation. Shame we don't have time, or I'd turn your mind inside out. Again. But of a Jesus or somebody that's been crucified, that's dying, of having some complaint. The evidence that they took a nap, by the way, was not necessarily the recalling of the words of a Jesus saying, you know, how the hell this happened to a man of my intelligence? Or, that doesn't matter. We're back to the Adam story. We have made a good circle. The proof of his taking a nap, the proof of him falling, was that he said anything. Only the mind has a comment. Only the mind can say, no comment. Because if you say no comment, you still got a comment. Because you still got a mind. You're still mulling it over. Consciousness, it doesn't think, do I have a comment? Should I complain? Should I ask them, could you move one of these nails over? Could you quit sticking me? I'm dying. Would you leave me alone? Could you put a shade over my head? Give me a hat maybe before I die. All that's irrelevant. You don't need to know what anybody said. All you got to know is that they said something, and you think, well, that's a shame. I hate that they died that way, but what's worse, I hate they took a nap right there at the last minute. Well, if you were charitable, you would, if you understood it. If you have a comment, you don't understand what's going on. And by the way, I have notified our legal department, my personal attorney, to relinquish that from my personal copyright control, that if any of you want to use that as your epitaph on your tombstone, I want you to know you're free to do so now, and I will not sue.